August 31st, 2010. I went to have lunch with my mom at Allen Elementary School, where she is the principal. On this particular day, my brother Heath happened to also be visiting. I was on my lunch break from cosmetology school at Columbus Technical College, so I wasn't able to stay long, but I wanted to say hello. Heath had a way of knowing when things were not going well for me. He could tell from the short visit that I was not in a good place. I just ended a long-term relationship and was now commuting to and from Noonan with my mother. I was also experiencing several problems in my relationships with family and friends and was feeling lost. I was depressed and felt like nothing made sense. I needed an older brother's guidance, but my pride would not allow me to ask for it. The next day, Heath called me with an idea. He said it had been on his heart to ask me to move in with him, but he wanted to lay down some ground rules first. I was thrilled when we got off the phone and packed my things up that night and moved in the next day. September 2nd, 2010, I pulled up to Heath's house on Carter Avenue. I thought, man, this is going to be such an adventure. I felt like for the first time I was experiencing freedom and was looking forward to this new chapter in my life. I didn't know what to expect when I got there, but Heath and his roommate Chris helped me to unpack my Jeep and get settled into the basement apartment. As we were carrying things in, I remember laughing and was excited about the opportunity to know Heath as more than my protective big brother, but as my friend. The boys had a daily TV schedule, and Heath was elated to share the details with me. I had to know what time Big Brother and Survivor came on, when I could catch the new episodes of How I Met Your Mother, and Wheel of Fortune. He was an adamant Wheel watcher and was making sure that I was too. He was pumped about this being the beginning of football season. He made sure that I didn't have plans on Saturday because we, as a household, were going to watch Auburn play. I realized quickly, however, that he'd stayed so busy that his TV schedule sometimes got pushed to the side. Heath was involved at many churches, leading many worship teams. He had ideas for days. He was always trying to change the world, trying to save the world, wanting his life to matter, wanting others to experience the love of Christ that he had. He didn't just add God to his life. Heath's life was centered around Jesus. For example, that Saturday, as we were watching College Game Day, I made a comment about how we should get a house-divided flag because we were all Auburn fans and Heath's other friend, our other roommate, Chris, was an Alabama fan. Heath's immediate response to this was, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," which is from the book of Mark. I remember being caught off guard, but impressed by his response in even such a casual setting. It showed me where he was spiritually, and I was subconsciously hoping that I would learn more about God by just being around him. Sunday, September 5th, 2010. I walked upstairs to the kitchen and saw Heath in the living room watching TV with Chris. He told me to come sit down and watch a movie with them, so I did. I didn't know that this would be the last time and I got to see my precious brother. Sorry. He thought that it was gross when I was affectionate to him. However, this afternoon he allowed me to snuggle up to him. He allowed me to snuggle up to him on the couch. We watched I Love You Man, and I laughed as the boys quoted every line before it was even said. After the movie, Heath went to take a nap, and I played video games with Chris for a while. And then I left and I hung out with my friends. The next day was my best friend Kara's birthday, and after school I went to her house and spent the afternoon and night hanging out with her. I got home late and went to bed without seeing anyone. September 7th, 2010, I woke up feeling strange. I was in a bad mood and didn't understand why I couldn't shake it. I went to school and everyone commented on my behavior. You're not like yourself. What's wrong with you? I didn't have an answer until that afternoon. I got a phone call from Elliot, but I didn't answer because I thought that he was calling me about breaking a house rule of not replacing the milk that I'd finished that morning. A few minutes later, my oldest brother, Hunter, called. I knew immediately that something was wrong, so I answered it. Hunter asked if I knew where Heath was, if I had heard from him. I said no, and then he asked if I would call him. I told him Heath was probably just asleep on the couch, having just gotten off work from his early morning shift at the radio station. Then my mom's friend April called. She was hysterically crying. I ran outside to talk to her. I was worried that it was about my mom, who had a history of heart problems. She informed me she informed me that my mom was fine. It wasn't about her, but she refused to tell me. She said that if you don't know, then I can't tell you. Then she said, it's your brother Heath, and he's been shot. I knew I had to find Heath. I had to make sure that he was okay. For some reason, I didn't think that Heath was dead. I thought that he had been shot in the foot. So I was upset, but I was still able to maintain composure because I was thinking about rehab and the physical therapy and the things that I would have to help him go through. With all these things running through my mind, I ran back inside of the school. I took 2 steps to my station and grabbed my car keys. My best friend Brittany was also in cosmetology school with me and refused to let me drive, so she took my keys and we got in my Jeep. I called everyone I knew to try to find my brother. My uncle called me from my mom's phone and said, everything's fine, Heath is fine, come to St. Francis. I barged into the emergency room screaming, I'm Hannah Jackson and I want to see my brother. I was rushed down back hallways and taken to a room full of people that I hadn't seen in years. It was like a dream. I kept saying, where's my brother? I want to see my brother. Where is my brother? About an hour later, this nurse came in and said, do you want to see your brother? I will take you to see him. We walked into a room that was divided by a small wall and an empty bed. I ran in and saw that in the next bed, my mother was hooked up to machines and she was crying. I was confused. I looked at the nurse and said, where is my brother? I want to see my brother. I thought you were taking me to see him. My mom interjected with, you can't see your brother. He's in the morgue. That is how I found out that it was much more serious than just a shot in the foot. Heath was dead. I was enraged. I was devastated. I wanted out of the room. After much convincing, my best friend Brittany got me checked into the hospital. I told her that I was not in the mood for visitors, so she made sure that no one came in. She stepped outside to find Kara, and in that 5-minute gap, the associate preacher from our childhood church walked in. I didn't want to hear about God. I was mad at God. I felt like it was useless. I'd given up on religion, on humanity, and on myself. The preacher said, okay, just do this one thing and I will leave. I reluctantly listened to him. He said, close your eyes. Erase the events from today from your mind. What's the first thing that you think of? I opened my eyes and demanded to have a Bible. Romans 5:6 appeared in my mind. It was Heath's AOL screen name and his favorite verse, so I had to know what it said. I read, in due time, when we were still sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. Immediately, my heart was overwhelmed. I felt hope and I felt love in the midst of despair. 2006, my boyfriend was killed in a tragic car accident less than a mile away from my house. Heath was the one to bring words of wisdom and comfort during that time. He also had experienced his girlfriend dying in a car accident years before that. He knew exactly what I needed to hear because he was familiar with the experience. He'd said, God didn't intend for us to have death. When he created the garden, we were meant to live forever with God. But because of sin, we have death. The Bible says that the wages of sin is death, and that's why we have it. Death isn't from God. It's from the enemy. So don't be blinded and don't blame God. Those words came to my mind as I lay in that cold hospital bed September 7th, 2010. I knew from reading Romans 5:6 that God wanted more for my life. I began to come to the realization that this life is but a vapor. Everyone handles grief differently. I believe there are two ways that people can go from death, towards God or away from God. The case with Heath was no exception. Immediately after Heath's murder, some family members and friends began working with ministries, made total changes in their life. That was not the case, however, with me. Despite the amazing revelation that I had experienced in the hospital and the immortal words from my brother, I was still running. The months following my brother's death were extremely emotional. Every second was different. It wasn't even a daily thing, but living moment by moment, taking things as they came. At first, I didn't want to be by myself. I moved in with Kara and her family. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to live in the place where Heath was murdered, so it made sense to live with them. I knew this move was temporary, and I was once again searching for a new chapter in my life. 2 months later, I found a one-bedroom apartment in Midtown. I wanted to be alone, free to mourn Heath's death by myself. Heath died just before the holidays. It was heart-wrenching to think that we would have Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas all without him. Previous years, Heath and I would jump in the car and travel to my aunt's house in Noonan, and the whole family would get together and sing and eat and celebrate. But not this year. After the intensity of the holidays wore off, I remember sitting in my room by myself one afternoon. Out of nowhere, I began to cry and ask God why. Why Heath? Heath was your child. He was your worker. All Heath wanted was for people to love you. Why would you take him? Immediately, my mind was taken back to the things that Heath said, and then I thought about one of the last conversations that Heath and I had. It was about Australia and how he wanted to go overseas and to learn about Jesus, then to do mission work in other countries. I knew that it was God telling me to finish what Heath had started. I began praying and asking God to help me. I spent a year overseas doing mission work and receiving healing from the devastation that was my life. What many people didn't see was that Heath was not only my protective older brother, but he was also the only person that I knew that would tell me what I needed to hear instead of what I wanted to hear. He had wisdom beyond his years. This was awesome when he was alive, but after his death, I was suddenly faced with making choices without him. I had to grow up and decide things for myself. I no longer had a scapegoat. It was a difficult year, but I've seen my life completely transformed, and God received glory even through Heath's death. The testimony of God's faithfulness to me during Heath's death has impacted not only people in America, but also Papua New Guinea, Palau, Australia, New Zealand, London, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Italy, Guatemala, Africa, India, Nepal, China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia. Doesn't make the pain of losing Heath go away, and it doesn't mean that I don't constantly think of my precious brother. But it shows that God really has taken such horrible, terrible circumstances and has made them beautiful.